UFP, the United Federation of Podcasts.
Welcome, listeners, to another episode of All Good Things, a Star Trek Universe podcast on the United Federations of Podcasts. I'm your host, Patrick Devlin, and join with me, not as always, a special guest, Ken Tripp. Ken, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, Patrick. Thanks for having me aboard. I'm under a lot of pressure here to try to fill in for the Queen, but I'll do my best.
Yeah, Amy, that's big shoes to fill, even though she doesn't actually have big shoes.
I'd never really checked.
She's been in my house. They're normal size.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you took notice. I've met her a few times, but anyway, it's going to be fun. Where the heck did we go there? Anyway, thanks, Amy, for allowing me to come on and talk a little Picard. I'm looking forward to it.
So much like I mentioned last week during the outro, Amy is gallivanting around the galaxy now. So Ken Tripp is going to fill in, thankfully, and thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. I figure, we'll still have that dynamic of good back and forth. It's just normal between Boston and New York anyway.
Exactly. It has to happen.
Has to.
It's not allowed to be any other way.
Nope.
So,
we are genetically bred
to argue.
To argue,
yes. So you can find the network on Twitter and Facebook at UFP Earth. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can message the network at contact@UFP. So, Ken, before we get into this episode, since you haven't been on, for Picard itself, what are you thinking about the series overall so far?
Yeah, I'm enjoying it, Patrick. I am. It's very different from what I thought it would be, obviously, and I think that's the same for a lot of folks. It's more cerebral, right? So for folks that know me, I'm a big Star Trek: The Motion Picture fan, and I love TNG as well. I loved it all, but. And I kind of am one of those geeks that kind of enjoy the banter and the discussions. I like great dialogue, right? I like my share of action too. But what I like about Picard is, they're really telling a story here. And in true Star Trek form, I think, the special effects are very much almost tertiary to this story. I wouldn't even say secondary. This is a great storytelling production that I think, it's moving slowly. I think there are times, sometimes even I'm going, okay, we can move this a little faster here, or we get the point. But overall, I am enjoying it. And how can you not? I mean, Patrick Stewart being back, all of that. My only wish is that they did this 10 years ago, because the show can't go on a real long time. I mean, I think he's 79, 80 years old. And he looks every bit of 79, 80 years old. And it's just one of those things where somebody you really like and enjoy and love seeing him do his job. You just wish it could go on even longer. So hopefully, we get 2-3 years out of this, but it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I would agree that it would have been better 5 to 10 years ago. But as you were saying with the dialogue and everything in this show, I think Patrick Stewart is on top of his game. Like, his facial expressions, especially during this episode at some point, at one point when he's trying to get onto the planet, and he's like, well, just tell the Central Command I'm here. And they're like, that's the first thing we did. His facial expression tells more of a story than anything else in that scene. Mm-hmm. Just his reaction. And I think it's just amazing because that's the kind of little nuances that I expect in good shows, and we're getting a lot of it now.
Well, that's true acting, right? And sometimes an expression speaks volumes, and he has that ability. He's, one of the top actors ever to come out of or to go through Star Trek. Let's put it that way. But no, that I agree with you. He is really on top of his game, and that's why I'm saying, this is something where it's like I'd love to see a 7-year run or something, but I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, and I was just checking while we were talking, and Patrick Stewart is 79 years old. He's born in 1940, so. How long does he expect to be able to keep up with the schedule of something like this?
Well, if he follows Bill Shatner's example, maybe longer than we think, right? He's going to be 90 in March, and the guy has no stop button. So,
with any luck, so
yeah.
But I guess let's get into the episode. One of the first things I noticed in this episode that I found crazy was the Romulan warrior nuns, the Qowat Milat.
Yeah.
What did you think of that whole concept? Like, we never heard of it before, so.
Well, I like the concept. It's relatable. It's kind of that combination of Western and Eastern culture. You've got they're definitely nuns, and they're definitely dedicated to their cause, and then you've got that warrior element of it that just reminds me of something that's more Far Eastern. But no, I guess in a sense we kind of look at Romulans that way. I think that it's a great idea. Like you said, we haven't seen it before. I like when they introduce new things. What's interesting to me is, just like in the Federation, where you have so many different species and elements and planets. In Romulan, it's just Romulan, but you're diving down into all the different cultural aspects of their society, and it's got to be as big and diverse as anyone else's.
Yeah, that's, I think, the best part of basically all the new Star Trek we're getting is now the different races are no longer monolithic. We're getting different facets of each race. So, they point out in this episode that the Qowat Milat, they are basically diametrically opposed to what we know about Romulans. They're not secretive. They have absolute candor, which is exactly opposite. They, them and the Tal Shiar do not get along at all. So you would assume to see this in any society. There's going to be people who don't get along with each other, no matter how small you even make the society. So for us to now not get these, Klingons are warriors and Vulcans are just logical and Romulans are just sneaky is great in my opinion. I'm really enjoying the fact that we're seeing these different cultural identities within the cultures themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it just makes the universe that much bigger, and in many cases more realistic, Patrick. Sometimes when you get into what has happened to Earth and the Federation prior to this series, you kind of got highlights and outlines as to how it got to where it was, but not necessarily how it all got pulled off. And so when they go into these types of stories and you still see different ethnicities, different cultures, different points of view amongst one race, it's more relatable.
Yeah, I agree. And like I was saying, if you look, the United States is not the same as England, but then if you look, the East Coast is not the same as the West Coast, or New York's not the same as Boston, or even Brooklyn's not the same as Queens. No matter how small we make the society, you're always going to find differences in that society. So it only makes sense that we're getting these kind of stories. What I found really interesting about the Qowat Milat was that they're all women. Yes. And this is like the opposite of the stories we're used to getting just in TV in general until very recently.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. One I hadn't thought about until you just mentioned that. So yeah, that's interesting. And I guess you look at them kind of as quote unquote nuns, it makes sense. But they are truly priests, or the heads of what they're that society, for lack of a better term.
Right, and Picard says in it that they're the single greatest fighting warriors, something like that. Basically, that at man to man. Bad term, I guess, but single combat, me versus you, they're the greatest he's ever seen, and he knows Klingons. So they're clearly better than Klingons, right? They're clearly better than, I don't know who else would be a hand-to-hand combat race, though.
Yeah, hard to say, but, they're kind of, I guess, I don't know if it'd be more related to ninjas or Vikings, but somewhere in that, where you had just these folks that were incredible at what they did, and, I don't know how far back it goes. It seems like everything when you talk about it, it's like since day one. But no, it's a pretty cool. I guess I wouldn't even know how to qualify it. I guess sect maybe within them, and I guess it must be very, very small, so very, very elite.
Yeah, I guess sect would probably be the best because it does come off as kind of a religion when you use the term nun in general. So
right, exactly.
And then, like I said, they're all, I guess, on this planet Vashti, which used to be friendly but is no longer friendly to the Federation, which we find out as we move through this episode is because the Federation abandoned them. And but the Quat Malat, the leader of that, I forget her name. I'm terrible with character names, but she's still friendly with Picard. But everyone else pretty much hates him. And the planet itself has become extremely xenophobic. When we see Picard land, well, first they try and get him on the planet. And this is the scene we were talking about a minute ago, where he tries to get on, and they won't let him. They don't care it's him coming. So they have to find another way. And Rios is basically like, all right, we'll give him money then. That'll get you on the planet. But when he lands, he sees the sign, Romulans only.
Mm-hmm.
So he can't go in that establishment and, order breakfast or whatever. It looks like a restaurant of some kind.
Right. Yeah, it was interesting take. And to me, that's always interesting how, people look at intent and, you play the victim card and you blame whatever it is. So I'm sure the Federation came in, Picard came in, they were leading this huge charge to save Romulus. I think it's very noble. We know what happened with Spock. It failed. The effort was there, but it failed. But, there's also limited knowledge into what the Romulans themselves were trying to do to save themselves. I mean, it doesn't take a scientist in that century. You could take a scientist 2 centuries prior to our own to understand that your sun is going to explode, right? I mean, it's
right.
You can see it's coming. So that is one part where I'm still trying to get my arms around. I do understand for the plot of the story, they're putting everything on the Federation. It just seems strange to me is that their biggest advocate, Picard, who has been saying that the Federation lost itself and he left because of it and resigned because of it, that they hold him accountable. Granted, if he stayed, maybe he could have done more, but there's nothing to say that would be true.
Right. So that's what I'm holding on to, is the fact that if he had stayed, he probably could have done more, right? Like, that's kind of my argument there. Or at the very least, that the story they're trying to tell is that leaving wasn't the right choice, obviously.
It was very abrupt, right? So that was the thing. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this is, Picard has moved from infallible in the beginning of TNG to now where he's very fallible. And how he thought of himself and how he looked at himself or whatever, presented himself so that he could make a threat to resign and never think that they would accept it. And they did instantly, it changed the game. And that's, that's an incredible thing. And I think it was very humbling. And his reaction to that was to go into exile. When you think of all of those things, you're like, is this the guy we knew at all? But you're absolutely right. Could he have done more if he had stayed? Even if he did resign, instead of just slinking off and being a spokesperson or whatever, or politically getting involved. There's a tons of things. If he stayed in the game, maybe not as an admiral in Starfleet, but if he stayed in the game, maybe other things could have happened.
Well, and even if he couldn't accomplish much, right? After resigning, he wouldn't be universally basically hated like he is now,
right?
Because people would have still seen him.
Yeah.
But now, like if you're on Vashti, or you're the boy who's Elnor, or if you are Rafi, you quit, and I didn't see you for 14 years. As far as I know, you just gave up on us too. Because again, he was in the speech they give, he was the figurehead that was rallying the Romulans for the help that he was giving them. You know what I mean? So
right.
To them, Starfleet really doesn't matter in this. You're the one who came here. You told me you were going to save us. You failed. And when you failed, you just stopped coming at all. You didn't even show up to tell us you failed. Yeah.
It's like I said, that slinking out of the picture completely, I completely get it, right? He is now, just in a sense, a coward. He didn't fight. He put up an argument. He lost an argument. And then that was it. There was no round 2, 3, 4, or 5. Then, again, very, very Picard-like. It's interesting if you think from the JJ movie, right, in Star Trek 09 to now, that, 2 of the main, most beloved characters in Star Trek, failed when it comes to this Romulan mission and its impact